Hey, what's up, everybody? 4 subscribers now. Woohoo! All right. So today I'm going to do a little video talking about my writing past, my current writing career, and as well talk about when I went to go get an MFA, which is, if you don't know, a master's in fine art, and if I think it's worth it for writers to get an MFA in creative writing, and how I was fortunate enough to basically get a very unique MFA compared to most of what is offered out there. So let's go back about 4 years. I was reading the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. You've probably heard of it. It was a big seller. Lots of people read it. It was sort of a self help book, by the way. I hate self help books, but I was reading it, and mostly the part that inspired me was reading about Charles Bukowski. Now, when I was younger as a kid, I always was interested in writing. I used to even carry a Frankenstein book around with me, even though Frankenstein, if you know, it was written in the 1800s by Mary Shelley. And yeah, as a 6, 7 year old kid, I didn't understand a damn word in it. I just really liked looking at the cover, and try as I might, I tried to read the words as hard as best I could, but it just wasn't happening. So, no, but the material I could read at that time, I read pretty ferociously. I was an artist. I mean, I was really into drawing. Even my first grade teacher, she tried to tell my mom to put me in this special program for art and stuff like that. My mom didn't end up doing it, but that's kind of beside the point. The point is basically that I've always been interested in this, but I was at a time in my life where I was working, a normal job. I was actually an entrepreneur. I ran my own business, and it wasn't fulfilling me like I wanted it to. It was just kind of that revolving door of capitalism. I was always just trying to onboard new clients, keep them long enough to get what I needed out of them financially, and then go and market and search for more clients. And ultimately, it left me feeling unsatisfied and unfulfilled. And I tried to figure out what it was that I was unfulfilled by. So I was reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, and I was reading about Charles Bukowski, and I was reading a story about how he was a mailman, or he worked in the post office for like 20 or 30 years. And basically, it was just extremely inspiring to hear that he did that for so long and didn't find success as a writer, but that he just continued to plug away until he eventually did find his success much, much time later. So basically, let's go back for, I guess it would be almost 5 years now. I start writing consistently every day after work. I'm writing consistently at night. I'm reading as much material as I can, and it's very important, for a fiction writer, in my opinion. Well, not in even my opinion, any fiction writer will tell you this, to read as much as possible. So every day after work, what I'm doing is I'm sitting down 2 to 3 hours. I'm writing, and I'm doing 2 to 3 hours of reading. And basically, what happened was I didn't know anything about MFA programs really at all. And I'd read Stephen King's book on writing. Maybe some people have read it, but basically, he says not to do an MFA program in that book. And but I definitely knew that I was lacking in the overall craft of writing itself. I was lacking in understanding the art form fully, both on what we call prose level and a story level. So my at that time, someone in my family texted me and told me about this program that, oh, excuse me, sorry, and told me about this program which was in Palm Desert, which was only about 45 minutes away from me, and it was the University of California Riverside Low Residency Program. So I started looking into this program, and it's the director is Todd Goldberg, who is a crime fiction writer. Actually, his book is right there, one of his books, Gangster Nation, and he just released a book called The Low Desert, which you should definitely check out if you get the chance. Very good. And so I'm checking out this program, and I'm realizing all of these professors here are genre fiction writers. Not, I mean, they do write literary fiction as well, but that the program overall supports genre fiction. And then I began to learn slowly over time as I, submitted my writing piece to them, and then I wrote the necessary essays to try and get into the program, which I didn't think I would ever get into it, that um, that's not how all programs are. I was very fortunate to get into the UCR low residency program where they support the art of genre fiction, because I mean the fact is, at the end of the day, like, you can learn all the literary all the things you want about literary fiction. You can learn just the craft and the prose, and keep it what they consider very integral to just, that aspect of writing. But at the end of the day, what makes the most money as a writer is being a genre fiction writer. So they teach you how to have a career there. They teach you actually how to, get yourself out there, to query to agents, to become a well-rounded writer who can actually support themselves and make a living. The director, Todd, who I just mentioned, he always jokes. He says that at our program we create writers who, we help build writers' careers, whereas at other programs they create basically well-read accountants. So yeah, I mean, we learn about story we learn on a story level about how to, do story in a way that's thrilling and entertaining, not just, the minutia of the craft. Although we do study prose extensively, we don't just study, the minutia of the craft, but not a lot of times in those other MFA programs, they're not giving they're not teaching the writer the ability to learn the story craft, because at the end of the day, if you're going to get published, you need to be able to go in a story from A to B to C to D event happening, all happening in a sequence that makes sense and is thrilling and entertaining for the reader. And unfortunately, at a lot of MFA programs, you're not going to get that. Now, with that said, a lot of my professors didn't go to programs like UCR low residency program. Okay, so what did they do? Well, they did go to traditional MFA programs, and they did get that traditional literary teaching. Now, this is where great genre fiction comes from. It takes literary elements like great prose, a great understanding of craft, a great understanding, of just shaping flow, and then taking those story elements that are interesting and entertaining and combining them together to produce stories that are interesting and layered in a way that different types of readers can understand it, that you can have your guy who likes to read, one Stephen King book a year, reads maybe 10 popular genre fiction books a year, your Dan Browns, etc., and they can still understand this book and they can still relate to it. Well, we can also have the more sophisticated reader who reads, your very literary, Tolstoy, Dickens, loves, a very complex type of story. And so when you can combine those two elements, that makes a great genre fiction writer. So that's one of the things that the program offered me. Now, it may sound like I'm endorsing the program. By no means am I like a sponsorship for the program, but of course I went there and I loved it. I mean, it was, for me, the best experience of my life. I mean, honestly, like, so how a low residency program works, and this is something important to understand if you're considering MFAs, is that a low residency program is all online, meaning that your communication with your instructor is going to be all online. Now that might sound bad, like, I know the pandemic's going on right now and everybody's doing online schooling, and it might suck, but when it comes to the craft of writing, this works actually much better, because when we're doing the discussions, they're all in written form, which is, what are we? We're writers, so why not have, the lectures in written form and the discussions back and forth in written form? That makes more sense than, doing it out loud in some sense. So on top of that, okay, you're getting notes from your professor, and then those notes you're taking them in, and they're kind of ruminating in your mind, and you're taking your own time to understand, versus just that direct interaction in a classroom where you're just being told what to do. Okay, and then what we do is at the end of each semester, so twice a year, we'd go stay at a hotel, the Ranchos Las Palmas Resort, for 10 days, and there we would get those in-person lectures, not just from our professors, but from great writers. They bring in great writers from around the world, from around the country, and on top of that, film producers, because we don't only teach genre fiction writing like that. The fiction writing itself isn't the only thing you can do there. You can do nonfiction as your major, you can do screenwriting as your major, you can do playwriting as your major, and it's one of the only programs that offers that as far as an MFA goes, which is amazing and great, and actually the program is ranked number one in the entire country among all low residency programs in screenwriting, and I think they should also be ranked number one in fiction, but it's a relatively newer program. It's only, I think, at this point somewhere between 10 and 15 years old. So unfortunately, there's some MFA programs that have been around forever, are basically archaic at this point, that get that ranking above them just because of that reason. But yeah, like my MFA experience was great. Like going on those residencies, meeting people like me that I could, relate to, that were my type of people. We got to do a lot of cool things. Like obviously staying at a resort is awesome, but we got to sit around. We had fire pits, we had drinks, we got to do that kind of stuff at night, and then we're workshopping during the day, and then we're going to these lectures, and we're meeting really cool people. We're meeting people from the business side, to actors, to agents for novels, for nonfiction, for all of it. Everything is covered, and there's people from everywhere who come. Todd does that. The director does that for us. And it was an amazing experience, honestly. Now, as far as other MFA programs go, I know they don't necessarily work that way. So that's something to really consider, but you can get a lot out of it in terms of learning the craft of writing. Just, unfortunately, like I was reading George Saunders' book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, which is a craft book about story, using Russian literature to break down story. And he said, he has a lot of students at the Syracuse MFA program, which is one of the best MFA programs in the country. It ranked one of the best MFA programs in the country. And he said that unfortunately, when he gets his students' work, what happens is that a lot of the stories are just very, they don't have a lot going on. They don't know how to move from point A to point B to point C. They're beautifully written, but at the end of the day, an agent can only sell your book based on story, because there has to be a commercial appeal, and that's how you have to make money as a writer. So, what are the other options for people who go to MFA programs? Yeah, you can become a professor. Yeah, you can move on to do a PhD in literature if you want to do that. But unfortunately, what happens for a lot of those people, if they're not just focused on really being a writer, is they stay in those professorship positions, and then they don't really grow in terms of their writing career, because those positions, they take up a lot of their time. But also, to get into a program like an Ivy League, school as a professor, or just any of these kind of prestigious MFA programs, you have to have a very specific type of career, a very specific type of publication history and things of this nature, and definitely, like, being a commercial writer, having genre fiction be part of your resume, so to speak, isn't really going to get you to that point. So, like, what are you left with if you're a genre fiction writer? Well, you're kind of left with being a community college professor, or if you're very fortunate, you'll find a program like the UCR low residency program. But obviously, there's only a limited amount of those out there. But yeah, doing an MFA, there's huge benefit in terms of like learning your craft. As far as what I gained over the 2.5 years that I was in the MFA program, it would have taken me 30 years on my own to be able to learn what I learned in that 2.5 years. And so, yeah, I definitely suggest that if writing to you is something that you are determined to do, if writing to you is something you are all in on, it's the thing that you want to do with your life, then absolutely, an MFA program can be amazing for teaching you the craft, for teaching you how to improve, and not only, you know, maybe the craft side, but also, you know, the mental side, the psychological side, how to approach, you know, writing in that way. So yeah, I mean, there's gives and there's takes, and you have to consider what program you're going to go to, where you're based at, obviously in the country. I was super fortunate in the program I went to. I don't think that everybody gets the same experience from MFA programs. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's up to you. There's of course tons of writers who've never gotten a master's in fine arts, who went on to be greatly successful popular writers, and it's certainly possible. I'm just saying that if you learn that craft and you have those capabilities, then it's going to be so much easier for you in when you do sit down to write that book and to create those stories. You're going to have such a good grasp on what you're doing that you're more efficient. You're cutting out a lot of time and a lot of potential pain and heartache that, you know, could come in from, you know, writing a novel for 5-10 years that doesn't sell at all. So yeah, MFA programs, I think overall, I think they're a great thing to do if you are extremely committed to the craft of writing, to becoming a writer. But you have to kind of check in with yourself, and then you also have to consider which program you want to go into. Is it going to be a traditional program? Is it going to be a low residency program? You know, like I've heard statistics as far as like at the University of Iowa that something crazy like 75% of their writers stop writing within 2 years after the program, and that's just because the program is so brutal. You know, like the workshopping and everything was so brutal. Really, at the program that I went to, it cultivated an environment of a lot of positivity, and I think that positivity goes a long way in helping the writer continue to write after they're out of the program. I mean, ultimately, a lot of people, about I think 50 to 60% of people, stop writing totally within 2 years after they're done with the program. And unfortunately, I just think that's a product of like they like, you know, writing, they like reading, they like all of that, but I don't know that they were really necessarily ready for the level of commitment that it was going to take, or they didn't love it. I mean, I'm not trying to be. I'm trying to like steer away from being judgmental here. That's not what I want to do. But what I'm trying to say is that there's got to be a reason that about 50% of people stop writing within the first 2 years after they graduate from an MFA program, and I think that just comes down to like it's really hard. Like you have to be all in on doing this, and that's the reality of the career that you're going to have to choose, and it's going to be difficult at times. I mean, like I said in my video about why I'm doing a YouTube channel, is that there's no guarantees in this industry. There's no rules. There is no set amount of money that you're totally guaranteed. Yes, once you get a contract, but you don't know how much that contract's going to be. You don't know when you're sitting down to write that book if that's going to be a $30,000 contract or a $300,000 contract. You don't know how your agent's going to be able to negotiate those deals. You don't know any of those things for sure. So it's a career that can have wild ups and downs, and you got to be, you know, fully prepared for that before you go into it. And not everybody wants that. You know, there's certain people, and I don't blame them, who like, you know, a steady job where they can punch in and punch out, and that's nice. And a lot of writers, I mean, do that as their, you know, secondary job, of course. And, you know, yeah, and I'm one of them who just prefers to have a secondary job, like I've said before, where I can just go in, I can do the work, I can let the stories kind of ruminate in my head, let them soak in, and then I come home and then I do the work, and then, you know, and at a certain point, I have confidence that, you know, I will sell my book and that my career will take off and that those things will happen. But in the meantime, of course, I have to, you know, approach it this way. And I have to do what is best in terms of my creativity and what standard of creativity I hold myself to. So that's how I approach all of it. So with that said, I think that MFA programs can be great, but understand and think through clearly before being prepared for what all of it is and what it entails, and that you don't necessarily need it in order to potentially sell a book, but you do have to study the craft of writing regardless. And the best way to do that is through reading. The best way to do that is through learning from others. The best way to do that is through workshop. So that's it. Anyways, guys, if you got anything out of this video, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate you watching. I think I have all of 4 subscribers now, so that's exciting. All right, guys, have a good one.